Every great offense has one thing in common. They're dominant in the trenches. So, how will the O Block fare this year for the Utah Utes?
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Locked On Utes podcast. I'm your host, JT Wistrcill. Thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We're continuing with our positional previews on the offensive side of the ball this week, and we are going to talk about the trenches where the dirty work gets done, the offensive line, and who better to bring on than to talk about these beautiful beasts of men than Bryan Brown. Bryan, how's it going?
Just a fellow beast showing up to defend and stand for his younger, more energetic, more athletic beast brethren, for sure. I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Other than trying to tongue twist my way into the beginning and the intro of the show, which for anybody who listened for the first year of it knows that's a fairly common occurrence. But I'm excited to be here, excited to be talking about the offensive line, the O block, trench town block, the pancake platoon. The Brethren of Girth, as my offensive line coach in college used to call us. So really where I belong. Although I will say this, dirty work to some, art to those of us in the actual trenches.
Thank you for correcting me. That is correct. True art. Hey, best athletes on the field, right?
Listen.
Oh, come on.
Under oath? But yeah, no, I think the offensive line and the O block in particular at Utah is extremely athletic. There are a lot of guys up front that, this is part of the evolution of the program is we're starting to see all those recruiting cycles starting to come together where Utah's finally getting the development that they were expecting from a lot of younger guys. And now we're starting to see it show up on the field.
100%. And this is a fun group, and it's going to be a fun episode. I'm a former offensive lineman myself, so let's get right into it, talking about the leader of the O block, who I actually spoke to the other day, being Braeden Daniels. And Braeden even called it. He calls it the O block himself as well. So always great when those nicknames kind of pick up steam as well inside the locker room. But when you talk about Braeden Daniels, talking about a guy who came over from Texas, in total 35 career games played, 29 starts, had the 18 at left guard, 11 at right tackle, and now makes the switch over to left tackle. Versatility is the name of the game for Braeden. Really one of the most complete offensive linemen, not just in the Pac-12, but I really feel like the country. He's a guy who just gets it done. Great in pass protection, gets it done in the run game as well, and is going to do a phenomenal job as the leader of this Utah offensive line this season. Bryan, when talking about Braeden Daniels, what stands out to you the most?
Dedication. It's such an easy thing to say, but he is an incredibly hard worker, and he's really dedicated himself to his craft. He also brings a lot of experience to the table, but it's just really it's who he is, his attitude, his mindset, his approach. He is worked so hard to really develop himself, and you talked about his versatility. In theory, he's undersized for his position, whatever position he's playing, right? Typically we think about these big, thick, girthy offensive linemen, 300 plus pounds, and Braeden is an athlete. And if you talk to Dr. Skylar Maine, who he did a lot of work with in the off season, who's also worked with Cam Rising, Britton Covey, we've talked a lot about him, over at UteZone and on the Blockcast and other of my platforms. He says that Braeden is one of the strongest, most athletic guys that he's ever worked with for his size. And that's just because he's worked his tail off, and really dedicated himself to being a phenomenal offensive lineman, to knowing the scheme, knowing where he's supposed to be, and really just perfecting his technique. And it's allowed Utah to feel comfortable moving him to the left side of the offensive line to become that anchor. And we can talk about measurements and everything like that all we want. The bottom line, Braeden gets the job done, and he's done it in a variety of atmospheres against a variety of players in a variety of positions. And I think that dedication to learning every position, to varying his technique, because you know this as well as I do, playing center is very different than playing tackle, and playing guard is even different from both of those as well. What your assignment is, it's not just about the assignment, right? It's technical, it's how you're stepping. It's the way that you're stepping. It's how you're blocking the guy, and everybody just kind of looks at it and is like, yeah, you just block the dude that's in front of you. And it's like, excuse me? Oh, is that all you do? And it's just for him to be able to have that versatility. And I don't know if you ever played center, but it's extremely hard to block somebody with a hand between your legs as you're trying to snap. And as I'm throwing my snap hand or my off hand up and snapping automatically because it just comes out of habit. But yeah, it's just he's an incredible, and then his leadership too. I'm really excited to watch him showcase that this year.
Yeah, I love that you highlighted the leadership aspect at the end as well. But he really is just a stand-up performer. He's been, him and Brant Keithy are the two guys left over from that 2019 season for the Utes. So coming this year, fun to see Braeden finally get some shine as well. First day of media availability, I was not the only one who was trying to talk to Braeden. So now that Nick Ford is kind of gone, he's the guy everyone's looking to, and fun to see him get some shine. I will share a really quick story because you asked if I played center. So I did. I started my senior year of high school at center. I couldn't snap to save my life. So we just made it work for a few weeks. And then when I snapped, there was a crucial third down, and I snapped it right over my quarterback's head, and then I got benched. And then I moved over to guard. So I joked and say I started at two positions my senior year, but it is, like you said, so much tougher than people just make it out to be just in general. Shifting positions, knowing what's going on, and just all the different hand techniques, alignments, everything is so different depending on where you're starting. And we talked about versatility as a name of game for Braeden. I even asked him, I said, do you feel like you could play anywhere if you had to? I mean, of course, he's going to stay at left tackle all season. It's the most important spot along the offensive line, protecting Cam's blind side. But he said, I'll do whatever the team wants me to do. And you can tell he's a guy who's willing to do that. And it's a reason after this season, there's going to be a lot of NFL teams interested in his services because he's not just an outstanding player, but an outstanding man as well. So last year, he had the left tackle, right tackle spot, man down. This year, he's moving over to left. So who's coming in at right? Jaren Kump is back. Dealt with some injuries a little bit last year, but is healthy now, good to go. And he's a guy who does have 9 career starts as well. He's got 6 at right tackle, 3 at left tackle as well. Went down with that injury last year, but he's healthy and good to go. And he's another guy I feel good about coming back in because of all those reps last year, Bryan.
Yeah, and it'll be fascinating to see what happens in fall camp because we saw Falcon Kaumatule play extremely well there at the right tackle position in spring ball, and Jaren Kump has been the preferred player, but really struggled in the return from injury last year, just never could, or not even last year, I think it was, played 5 games in 2020, right? Hasn't really played. I think Josh Newman tweeted out that he's played 9 games total. And so he has really struggled to kind of capitalize on that early success, mostly because of injury. And with those big bodies, it takes a lot of time to get back to, really being healthy. And the bigger thing was just playing with confidence. And you could see it in those early games that he just didn't have any confidence in his body, didn't have any confidence in the things that really make his game operate, which is the athleticism, the power. He's got extremely long arms and huge hands. And if you don't feel like you're confident in your base and your ability to plant your foot in the dirt, so to speak, I guess nobody wants me to say rubber tire particle, chopped up stuff. But if you don't have that kind of confidence, it's really hard to play that position. We saw that from him last year. So I'm curious to see how he competes. I think that's one of his strong suits. Everybody loves Jaren Kump because I think it was his freshman year, Kyle Whittingham mentioned, he was running with the DBs in the conditioning group and everything like that because he's so fast. And that's, something that you really want with your offensive linemen is you want that explosion. You want that ability to have burst and that athleticism, but you've got to have everything else. You've got to have technique. You've got to know your assignment. You've got to play with confidence. And so will he be able to turn all that raw skill and talent into production on the offensive line and lock down that right tackle spot? I think it's one of the big question marks for the group going forward.
If you had to say right now, do you think he will be the starting right tackle versus the Gators in Gainesville, or do you think it will be Falcon?
That's tough.
Hard-hitting questions on Locked On Utes.
Yeah, I mean, that's why they follow. I do think that have to be careful with my words here. I think that Falcon should be the starter. I think Jaren likely gets the start. I think that what'll happen is you'll definitely see some rotation there early on. But the big thing, and I think this is the one area where Coach Whittingham and Coach Harding are going to be on the same page no matter what, they need to get that first 5 set and set early and get those guys repping out together. Now that said, like you don't want to put Kump out there if he's not ready and if he's not connecting with the rest of the group. And given that Falcon has practiced with all of them through spring, I think that just gives him an edge. That also being said, you want Kump to get reps, and so I think you will see a little bit of swinging door action with that right tackle position early on.
Yeah, I think it's something we saw the rotation last year between Bam Olaseni and Kump, and the offensive line was better when Bam got inserted in there. So it'll be interesting to see if Jaren can hold down that spot this year. Hopefully he's able to stay healthy the entire year, or if they do end up going with Falcon, and he'll end up being the better option. So one of the fun competitions to watch for this Utah team is for that right tackle spot, probably the spot that's the most up in the air, I would say personally. Bryan, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Just because we saw so much good stuff from Paul Maile last year, and,
Yes.
and really, the assumption that he's healthy, or if he's not, again, Coach Whittingham giving us nothing other than one player wasn't cleared for camp, right, in terms of health. And so if that one player is Paul Maile, we do expect him to eventually show up. But even so, like, they had good depth at the position in spring. We saw good things from Johnny Maile, who moved there. Well, that was a little bit of a surprise to me. He had really struggled at guard and then seemed to find a real comfort level at center there. Also saw Sataoa Laumea move over there and take some snaps. And so I think wherever they end up, putting whoever they end up putting at center, I think they have a lot of confidence in it. But regardless, Paul really set the tone in the middle of later of the season with the way he played at that position. And so I don't have as much concern there, oddly enough, which, maybe I should flip that because center is so important in terms of getting the calls out and getting everybody lined up and being on the same page. But I don't. I think right tackle is the one that I'm more worried about because it's so important to set that edge. And, like you said, we saw what happened with the offense when Bam Olaseni came in and really started to dominate once he got comfortable. The other big move was that we saw Braeden Daniels bump out to right tackle there, and suddenly things were so much better. So,
Yes.
It's a catch-22 in the sense that, like, the center is very important in terms of getting the calls, which you understand this. Like, if you're not on the same page with protection, you're going slide and everybody else is going man. Whoops! Like,
Yeah.
that's a car crash waiting to happen. And especially if you're not like there to connect on hand passes or things like that when we see stunts or twists or anything. And these are all these fun terms that you and I get that people are like, "What's a twist? Is that the thing you get from Costco with the cinnamon and sugar on it?" No. Although it wouldn't make sense to call it a churro. Anyways, the point being that, like, I think that the center position is in better hands, and that right tackle position is just the one that I have more question marks for because we don't know what we're getting from Falcon, and we really haven't seen anything from Jaren Kump yet to make us think like we should be comfortable.
Mm-hmm. No, so true. So we feel, like I said, really good about left tackle. Little less uncertain about right tackle, but sounds like two guys who are still capable of having really good seasons, depending on who wins the job. But time will tell in terms of who does end up winning that job. We're going to talk about the interior offensive line in just a moment, but first I want to tell you guys about BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, college football, of course, getting back in the swing of things, even golf. And as you guys know, the national media is always low on this Utah team. So head over to BetOnline, check in on some of the game lines, check in on the over-under for win total, see where they got Utah at. The national media is always a little disrespectful to the Utes, so make sure you guys head over to BetOnline and cash in on that. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, looking at the interior of this offensive line, I think the first guy I want to talk to is Sataoa Laumea. He's a guy who two-time All Pac-12, earned second team in 2020, started all 13 games at right guard last year. Just the definition of a solid, stable, steady guard, and I think he's going to have another really good year this year, Bryan.
Yeah, he's primed for it, and I think he's a guy that started basically since a freshman, took over the position. He plays with a lot of aggression. Aggression to me means confidence, and he has a lot of confidence both in his ability, his knowledge. I think playing in Southern California really boosted him a lot. As I've talked to people around the program, he came in early and knew the basics and the technique of the position, and was really invested in that kind of thing. And I think maybe caught some of the other freshmen off guard with how much he knew. And because of that, he's actually turned into a bit of a leader as well, helping coach other guys, helping teach other guys. And so his development was way ahead of things, and that's why he's able to step in and play the way that he is now. He's at a guard position, so I think if I'm being completely and totally honest, there's only so much that he'll really be able to show us, in terms of like actual stuff that we're seeing all the time. But he has to be a favorite to be one of the top linemen, not only in the Pac-12 but also on the team. And I think his versatility, I think playing center in the spring helped him a lot, both as a development in terms of understanding the other positions on the field, but also in giving him something to engage in. And that's something that I think we saw a lot with Nick Ford, where he was playing the tackle position and he looked bored. And that's, not my, just an observation. I'm not out trying to tell people that like Nick was, not a good football player or not taking things seriously, but just that engagement is huge with these guys, because especially a guy like Sataoa, where he's really, ahead of the curve. You've got to give him things to invest in and develop in to keep that interest at its peak, because otherwise you just kind of get lackadaisical out there. And I think that was good to bring him back into it, and also the added benefit of having to put him more in a leadership role will really help with his development as well.
So true. Yeah, great getting those center reps and getting more of that. One thing that you touched on that was really interesting to me, and we're going to talk about Keaton Bills in a second as well, is you just talked about like what you can show us as a guard. And I think that is a really good point, because a lot of times when you do play guard, there's not as many one-on-one opportunities you're going to see. You're working double teams to the second level. It's a Utah team that loves to zone block, so you're working up that way. And a lot of times, especially when you get a forefront, you're doubling the defensive tackles too. So definitely something where you're not going to get to see him operate one-on-one as much as, say, your tackles have to be able to hold up in pass protection one-on-one. Your guards, not as much. And Sataoa is very capable of doing that, but he won't have to as much, which is nice. So Sataoa got the left side man down. On the right side, you got Keaton Bills over there. He's a guy who started at left guard in 8 games last year, came in, played really strong. He also started 4 games at left guard in 2020 as well. So you talked about the shift in the offensive line when Braeden was moved out to right tackle. Bill's the guy who kind of came in, and he was another reason the offensive line really took off last year, just really solid and steady. Just another guy who doesn't really get beat in pass protection and does his job in the run game as well. So between Sataoa and Keaton Bills especially, Bryan, I just feel comfortable with the way the guard spots look for Utah.
Yeah, and I think you're throwing 2 very experienced guys into that, that position, that group, that interior, both guys that have really proven themselves and had to fight through competition in order to get to those roles, right? Different players, I think, in terms of like how they're built. Sataoa is a little bit more athletic, moves a little bit better. Keaton is much more of a power player. His ability to just get movement and just push and drive, especially one-on-one, which people do not understand how difficult that is. Like everybody just says, "Well, just line him up and block him." Like, okay, like the dude across from me, he's not 320 pounds and trying to push back. That's super easy. I don't know how many people are out there trying to push cars and call it super easy, but that's essentially the response that we get every time you want a short yardage situation. And that's the beauty of Keaton Bills, is he does get that movement. The curiosity with him is, can he continue to develop into a player that can move around a little bit? Because we've seen Utah really want to focus on some of that power action run game with counter tray and QB counter and the power game, and especially with a guy like Tavion Thomas, where he can get downhill, and if you open up a hole for him nicely, he can really do some things. That's really a piece of the offense that you want to get going. And so, will Keaton continue to develop, and can he build to that with that big, thick lower half that he has? We've seen him really develop in his pass protection, like you talked about, and his ability to clean the pocket, meaning go around, help other guys, knock dudes to the ground, and do that kind of thing is really helped Utah a ton. And the biggest thing is just his experience. He knows the offense, and he's coming back with a lot of different sets, plays. I'm trying to think, design. Having learned all that kind of stuff. So the bottom line with this group is that it's experience across the board. And there's a lot of experience. And even with Paul Maile, if he does end up the starter, and I mean, I just went and looked back through all the pictures that they sent out, and there's multiple pictures of Paul in there practicing. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that if the Utah Athletic Department is releasing those pictures, that we're okay to talk about it. Like he brings a lot of experience to the table, and that's a really great thing for this offense.
Yes, such a great thing. And one thing you talked about was just cleaning stuff up. I want to talk about that a little bit more. There's nothing better than when, let's say you're going against maybe a three-man front, or they're bringing a blitz from another side, and you're uncovered as a guard, and you can just come over while, let's say, the defensive end and offensive tackle are doing battle, and you can just come over and completely blindside a defensive lineman and absolutely delete him. One of the best joys you can have, and it's something Keaton Bills does very well. So one guy remaining in this interior offensive line group we haven't touched on yet. You've brought him up a few times, but Paul Maile. This is a guy I was extremely high on. I thought he came in and did a fantastic job whenever Nick Ford went down, whenever Keaton Bills went down and Nick Ford would slide over to right guard. Maile, he got it done. I mean, just talked about in the run game, extremely effective, moving guys from point A to point B, and even in pass protection, really solid. I feel like he can have just as good a season as Nick Ford had last year. I am extremely high on Paul Maile. Bryan, do you share that sentiment?
I do. I think what he brought was a lot of stability and really execution to the position. And with the experience that we talk about and all the talent that you have up front for Utah, he's a guy that I really have high hopes and high expectations can be that leader. Now, he is undersized, but he does fight hard. And I think you talked about it a lot. Like with the scheme that Utah runs, you're going to help your center a ton. Guards are either going big on big, whether it's play side against an even front, and big on big means one-on-one, as I slip into my old school, offensive lineman jargon. Or you're going to be head up on a nose and you're going to be getting some help from your guards. But that's the beauty of Paul, is that he is undersized. He can fit underneath a lot of those defensive tackles. He's extremely quick. He is talented at snapping. You mentioned that that's a skill that you really have to develop. And some people are just naturally acclimated to it. You and I, not built for the snapping life, and that's okay. We found our way otherwise, and yes. I was happy to play guard and played a little tackle and whatever. Paul is the center. That's where he's going to be. That's where you want him to be, and especially with the way that teams are using fronts, and I expect teams to come after him hard, but you're going to see his guards step up and really fight for him, and I think we saw last year that Paul's ability to just be a fighter and be in position, not always getting movement necessarily, but just being almost like a shield, is all that Utah really needs when you have so much depth back there at running back, and also such an incredibly gifted, wonderful, talented quarterback who moves. I don't want to say like a gazelle, but he just moves like almost like an angel back there in the pocket, like he's floating, but some like supercharged, extra twitchy angel. I don't know what angel that'll be, but angel cam rising, rising. So.
Oh, I love it. And that's actually one last thing we can touch on before we just move off the starting group of this offensive line is all these guys have such a good rapport with Cam. And a huge part of that is Cam being involved with these guys. You can tell he cares about his offensive linemen, talks with them, makes a point, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who protect him from getting killed out there. But it is still cool. Cam, one of the best leaders Coach Witt has ever coached. He talked about that. And that is no exception to the offensive line as well, where their chemistry has paid off in big dividends. One thing we've talked about throughout this entire podcast is how depth was crucial on last year's Utah team. Bam Olaseni came in, Paul Maile coming in, Keaton Bills come in. A lot of these guys didn't start the very first game of the season, but played really crucial roles. And you never know what's going to happen with injuries. So we're going to talk about some of the guys and more the depth of this Utah offensive line in just a moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about intercap lending. There is a reason that no lender helps more families in Utah with their mortgage needs. Intercap gets deals done. Quick and simple process. Intercap closes loans 2 weeks faster than the industry average. And though fast is great, the ultimate goal is to create a stress-free home loan process. And that is why Locked On's personal loan officer, Steve Carter, has delivered hundreds of Locked On listeners. So that's why he's delivered to hundreds of Locked On listeners so far, including Locked On's founder, David Locke. And let's be honest, if Steve can help keep David on track through the entire process, Steve can help anyone. And though Intercap is new to the Locked On Utes podcast, it's not new to Intercap is not new to assisting customers with all their mortgage needs. Since 1978, they've had 43 years of experience, and Steve Carter's been providing Locked On listeners with the best experience since 2018. Intercap is headquartered here in Utah, but licensed to help with all your mortgage needs in 40 states. Give Steve a call. His direct number is 385-800-8528. NMLS number 190465. So back to this Utah offensive line. This is a group. I feel really good about this starting group as a unit, Bryan. You got everyone along this offensive line has started at least 4 games. The one who started 4 games being Maile, but everyone else outside of that has had a lot more starts than that too. So I feel really good about this 5. And before we talk about the depth, I just want to ask you this. Do you think this is the best offensive line in the Pac-12?
Ooh.
I think there's one big competition to it.
I'd be curious to hear which one you think is the big comp.
I'm going
okay,
Oregon.
Yeah, I would say it's either got to be Oregon or UCLA. UCLA only they are replacing some big shoes with Sean Ryan departing at the left tackle position, but I think it is, and that's one of those things where it's just you try. Just look at the preseason All Pac-12 poll, right? Like there were, I believe Sataoa was on there. I believe Braeden was on there. If people had seen Paul Maile for the full year, I think he might have been either a first or a second teamer as well. So you look at that, like you've got 2 of 5 and the positions locked down, and really like Utah should be able to get another one on the top 2 first and second teams. But like just. They're returning a ton of experience. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of depth to this position. So I just this group as a whole, if I'm comparing it across the Pac-12, is by rankings in terms of recruiting, not the best, but without a doubt, as they developed and brought guys in under what I consider to be one of the best offensive line coaches in the country, and definitely in the Pac-12, and Jim Harding, they've moved that room right up there. And then credit goes to Harding, but credit also goes to those guys who are out there every single day working hard to do that. So.
100%. And honestly, that's how, look at Utah. Yes, Utah is starting to get recruiting classes in, but if you just look in general, developing talent and betting on high character guys is how they've been able to become this powerhouse of a program that they've transformed themselves into. They've never gotten as high as recruits as in Oregon or UCLA, USC, some of those schools, but they get the recruit the right guys in there. And because of that, it's paid huge dividends all across their roster, specifically the offensive line. And as you mentioned, I think when you're comparing our 5 versus Oregon's 5, I think it's really close. I think you might give Oregon a slight edge, but I'll say this. When you factor in the depth that Utah has, I'm going to take Utah's offensive line in that scenario. And speaking of that depth, Bryan, who are some of the guys, you mentioned Falcon already, but who are some of the other guys you think if we see an injury or if a guy's just struggling a little bit, we could see step in and help out the O block this year?
Yeah, I had to hold back just yelling out Michael Mokovici because I think he's the guy that stands out the most. And listen, we talked about Jaren Kump a lot. We've talked about a lot of different things in terms of positions, right? Yep. And somehow didn't get through any of that without talking about how Moko really, kind of established himself as a dude who can compete on this line and push some guys. We kind of it's hard to really take a guy out of a starting lineup, especially when they've done a good job. And that'll be the fascinating part about it is like Keaton Bills is going to have his hands full. Paul Maile is going to have his hands full. We talked about Falcon and Jaren and the competition going on there. But Moko is that dude that you point at and say, man, like this guy has a lot of potential. We saw him step into the role in the second half there at Colorado and be absolutely dominant. He is an explosive athlete, very strong, powerful upper body. And as he learns and develops the technique, it's just going to be really, really fascinating to see what happens with that position. And I think it just goes back to what Kyle Whittingham was saying. Like, they've got to get that front solidified because they need to know who they're – I know they're confident in having 8 to 10 guys, and it's, we've kind of been through the top 8 pretty easily. But it's, those positions, like for guys like Keaton Bills and Paul Maile who are going to have to hold guys off, they got to buckle down and really fight. Or Falcon Kalmatule if Kump's the one or vice versa, right? Like those are the fights that have to be settled. And I think I want to say it's a good problem, right? Because it means that you have depth. But if you have somebody that's pushing your starter that's that good, it's tough because you really like it becomes a real decision about culture and everything like that when it comes down to it, and how much loyalty do you have to the guys who have done a great job but just maybe aren't good enough.
You make such a good point. It's one of those things where, like, every series, if a guy has 2 bad series in a row, is it like, man, should we put Mokafisi in? Like, but that's also, you got to give your guy some trust if you roll with him as in that starting spot as well. So such an interesting thing to see how this coaching staff balances. And before we get you out of here, Bryan, one last question for you. And with something I didn't really think about a ton going into this, but just hearing you talk about Jim Harding as well. He's a guy that deserves to be mentioned and talked about for the job he's done with this offensive line group, developing them and then just also coaching them. He always gets these group of guys to come together and play together. And they were unbelievable last year, and they're going to have a chance to have another great season. So why do you think Jim Harding is one of the best offensive line coaches in the country?
It's just his coaching style, and I think he's an incredible teacher. He cares so much about his players, and he invests so much belief and faith in these guys and their development. And I think it really is a unique thing. He is very businesslike. That there's not a lot of like funny jokes or most of the time we think of offensive linemen being these very jovial, clever, not necessarily charismatic. I call him fat charming, like where we have like a lot of like Matt Foley type jokes. But he is very by the book, very very standard. Doesn't waste time or words or anything like that. But he cares so much about that group, and it's evident from guys who have played before all the way down. They all feel the same way. They all defend Jim, fight for him, love him. And he's really found a home with this kind of eclectic group of offensive linemen out here in the West Coast that, really blend a variety of personality types. Braeden Daniels comes from the Midwest. Sataoa Laumea is a California kid. Same with Maris Talova, who departed. But Jaren Kump's a local kid. But there's a great mix of backgrounds and personality types. I think the relationship he had with Bama Laseni, who was from London, and seeing their little pinkies up celebration during the Pac-12 championship game was really cool. Mm-hmm. But I think that really is the difference maker with Jim is his care factor. Anybody can come up with drills, right? Yeah. Like, you and I probably did a lot of the same drills. It's not a huge difference. What it is it's about getting those guys to buy into you and getting those players to work hard for you. And Jim Harding does an excellent job of developing those guys.
So true. I mean, hey, we've all hit the sled, right?
Yeah. It's not like somebody's like creating new sleds or like you got the welder out there modifying the thing, like chopping one up and being like, hey, we're going to readjust this. And no, they all come from Rogers in the same dimensions. Like, okay, maybe you've got a different color or maybe some teams will flip the bags upside down, but like there's not a lot of variety to that. There's not a lot of variety to scheme, but it's, how engaged can you keep those guys throughout practice? How much can you push? How much can you motivate them? And how much do you get them to buy into what you're selling?
In terms of equipment and a lot of that stuff you talked about, the playing field is level. So it really does come down to the man leading your group. And Utah is in great hands with Jim Harding. Just like we are always in great hands whenever you stop by the pod, Bryan. You guys can look him up at Twitter, at BrownBearSLC. Also, Bryan, just talk about some of the things you got coming up.
Yeah, things are busy. Like, I don't know if we're officially breaking news or anything yet, but you and I have some fun stuff that's upcoming. We'll save that surprise for another point. But the biggest thing, go to UtahBlockcast.com, subscribe to our newsletter. So we're building out the podcast a little bit more. That's been kind of my bread and butter, but you'll also find me over at UteZone. I'll be up at practice as much as possible. I've been traveling around trying to see as many high school teams in the state as possible. I'm going to continue that throughout the fall. And then just, lots and lots of Utah football coverage for sure.
Fall can be one of the best times of the year. And, hey, Bryan, I'm not going to save it for later. Me and Bryan are going to be calling football games together this fall. So if you guys love high school football, make sure you guys check out KSL Sports Rewind, where me and Bryan will be on the call together. So looking forward to getting after it, Bryan. Thank you for stopping by the pod again.
Absolutely excited to get in, start enlisting some of our brethren into the pancake platoon this fall. And thank you so much for having me on, man. It's a blast to always talk about this kind of stuff with you and love what you've done with the pod. You're doing a killer job. And, I knew it was bound to happen that someone would overtake the throne, but I'm glad it was somebody that's as willing to work hard and do a great job as you, and also is deserving of the opportunity.
Well, I really appreciate that, Bryan, and you're a huge reason I'm even here anyway. So thank you for being a great mentor as
It's just
well.
because I'm tall and eat a lot. Let's not get out of control with this.
Oh, for sure. If you guys are in the market for a second listen every day, we would like to recommend for you guys to check out Locked On Pac-12, where host Spencer McLaughlin will take you around the conference in 30 minutes with other Locked On hosts coming on as well. Lots of conference previews, realignment talk. Make sure you guys head over to Locked On Pac-12 to check it out now. He's Bryan Brown. I'm JT Wistrcill. Make sure you guys follow the show at Locked On Utes and have a great rest of your day.